Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Tuesday, it is 4 p.m. ET, and you have found us here at Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 13 going on 14 novels of suspense. My current novel is Her Perfect Life. Thank you for the applause, Megan Miranda. And the new one coming up soon is called The House Guest, which I am thrilled about. And as I always say, you will all hear about it quite enough, I'm sure, when the time comes. But today, I really want you to hear about this marvelous novel, The Last to Vanish by Megan Miranda, which is out today. And I have to tell you all just very, very quickly hey, Shannon, hey, Diane, hey, Anissa, everybody is arriving. I have to tell you that I honestly could not put this down. I don't mean like, oh yeah, I liked it. It was good. I couldn't put it down. I stayed up way too late reading it, and I don't care at all because every page was worth it. This is absolutely an astonishing book. And let me read you just a tiny bit of one of the rave reviews from Booklist, for instance. Here's a starred review. Says, this eerie thriller can stand next to Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House and Stephen King's The Shining. And Megan, what did you welcome? First of all, happy Pub Day.
Thank you so much for having me.
What did you think? That's pretty amazing comparison. And you see that though, right? What did you think when you read that?
I think I had to read it several times, and it's a huge, huge compliment. I really couldn't even believe it, and they're two authors that I look up to so much. To sort of be compared to that sort of atmosphere was just the best compliment I could imagine.
I mean, it's interesting too because taking away the supernatural elements of those novels, it's about suspense. It's about a place, a very haunting, if not haunted, but haunted in a way, wonderful, immersive place and an immersive setting where anything could happen. And also sort of illustrates the darkness of the human heart and love at the same time, like your books do.
I love that. I love that duality of, settings and place, that every place can be like the most beautiful place, but also like a terrifying place, depending on your perspective and depending on what's happening at that time. So
Well,
thank you.
you are absolutely the queen of setting, and I want to talk about that as we get into our interview. Renee is here saying, when I look over here, you all, I'm looking at the comments. I'm not looking away from you. I'm seeing who all is here. Chiang is here, and Renee is here saying, hi, Hank and Megan from stormy Southeast Florida. Stormy Florida is a perfect place to read The Last to Vanish, I have to say. And Sherry is here saying she's glad to be back after 2 weeks and such a great book to come back to. That is, if you just are arriving, The Last to Vanish, which we're talking with the fabulous New York Times bestselling author Megan Miranda, whose book came out today, and it is available for you all to just put your little hot hands on not right now, as we always say, but after the interview is over. And Megan and her publisher are also giving away a copy of The Last to Vanish. So put your comments, put your questions, put your applause, put your standing ovation in the comments, and you will be entered to win. We'll spin the wheel of fun at the end. So enter. Got to enter. You all know, let me quickly, and I promise you I'm going to stop talking in a minute, but I have to tell you that you are here on A Mighty Blaze, which was founded 2 years ago, or a little bit more, at the beginning of the pandemic by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt. And we have persisted with several dozen volunteers now to give you fabulous 24/7 programming right here on Facebook about books and novels and authors and writing and the reading community. And that's what we are here for. Alicia is saying, I loved your book cover, and Shannon saying, awesome cover. And that is very, very evocative. And let me tell you a little bit. Chiang is saying, love this book cover. Congrats on the pub day. Ooh, this is very nice. Very nice. Let me tell you all about Megan, although I know you all know her. Megan Miranda is the New York Times bestselling author of All the Missing Girls, The Perfect Stranger, and The Last House Guest, a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, ooh, and The Girl from Widow Hills, and her newest, The Last to Vanish. She has written several books for young adults, including Come Find Me, Fragments of the Lost, and The Safest Lies. She grew up in New Jersey, graduated from MIT, and lives in North Carolina with her husband and 2 children. And you know how to find her, Megan L. Miranda, on Twitter and Instagram, and author Megan Miranda on Facebook. And you can find all that at meganmiranda.com. So now you know her stuff. And now I want to let her tell you about this book. It takes place in Cutter's Path, North Carolina. But you take it from here, because I'm not quite sure to start with where it takes place or the main character. So you choose.
I love that you're not sure either, because I also am never sure whether to start with the town itself or the main character, because both of them are kind of the main character of the book. And the truth is, the first one that came to me was the town of Cutter's Pass. So this is a town that has become notoriously known for a string of unsolved disappearances. 7 visitors to the area have gone missing over the last 25 years. And, the locals say there's nothing inherently dangerous about this place, but people keep disappearing. It's a place that has a lot of outdoor offerings. They have hiking trails that go right to the Appalachian Mountains and the Appalachian Trail, and there's whitewater rafting. But I was really interested in this place that had this really notorious history, but really leaned into it. So all of the kind of storefront and restaurant names are kind of like giving a nod to the fact that people go missing here. And it is something that does not deter people from coming, but is almost a draw to them, because they're really interested in the urban legend and they think that they can be the one to uncover it. The book is actually narrated by a woman named Abby, who manages the local inn. And this inn is the site of the last disappearance. There was a journalist who was staying there 4 months earlier, and he was the last person to disappear on her watch. And the book begins when his brother shows up looking for answers, and she finds herself as the one person who's kind of able to dig into this town's hidden secrets, because she has this kind of unique perspective where she's a little bit of an insider and a little bit of an outsider, because she's lived there for 10 years, sees it as her home, but she knows she's not fully accepted as a full insider, and maybe there's secrets that she isn't quite aware of yet.
It's so I'm just nodding and nodding and nodding, because every single one of those things I have on my list of things to ask you a little bit more about. So wonderful. And I know people are saying, wow, this sounds great. Wow, this sounds great. Sounds so good, says Shannon Hansen. Let me read you all a tiny little bit of how we first learn from Abby about where this book is taking place, where this story is taking place. Really, really quickly. The town was best known, and we weren't known for much, for the unsolved disappearance of 4 hikers more than 2 decades earlier. The Fraternity Four, they were called, even though they hadn't been members of any frat together. But they were in their 20s, youthful and carefree, and they had been spotted here in town, had set off toward the Appalachian, and were never seen again. Here one moment in Cutter's Pass, gone the next. No clues, no leads, just vanished. Over the years, their story had morphed into something of an urban legend, layers added with each retelling, rumors spreading in absentia. Maybe the mystery would have faded with time, attributed to circumstance, blurred with history, if not for the string of disappearances that continued to follow with haunting regularity. Okay, now if you all do not have goosebumps from hearing that, I honestly just did. What was it like when you came up with this place, Megan? How did you come up with that?
So I love this idea, like we were talking about, that a place can be a draw, but also can be something that can have this, a dangerous history to it too. And where I first got the idea was, so I live in North Carolina and I have teenagers, and they've taken class trips to Charleston, and they would take these historical ghost tours. And I started thinking to myself, what if there was like a place where that history was just much more recent, and yet they didn't shy away from it. They kind of embraced this as their own. And there's a character in this book who gives tours to people, and he calls them walking tours, but they're kind of like urban legend ghost tours. And he takes them to the sites of these disappearances and tells them the rumors and the legends of what might have happened, even though some of these cases are 3 years old and 4 months old. And so that was kind of the inspiration point for this. And the first thing I did was kind of craft this history, and kind of having to walk that line of, it can't have been solved in the last 25 years, but is there some way that this kind of keeps people coming? Like, what's the lore of the mystery? So there's this fraternity four, which you could explain away in any number of ways, but then a woman goes missing 10 years ago, and then a nature photographer goes missing 3 years ago, and then a journalist who's investigating is the one who really kicks it off. And it's given the town this name as the most dangerous town in North Carolina. And that's kind of the history that I tried to build first, and everything kind of grew out of there.
Well, it grew so gorgeously, I have to tell you, because one of the things about human nature is that it's very easy to say, well, that's a coincidence. Well, 2 times that's a coincidence, but 3 times is not a coincidence, and 4 times is definitely something is going on.
Right.
And that's what compels us to, even though in our back pocket a little bit, and in Abby's back pocket a little bit, is maybe it is a coincidence, and she knows that. But let me tell you another thing that I just thought of. Sophie Hannah says the best beginning of the book is when an impossible thing happens.
Ooh, I love
Isn't
that.
that great? And then the reader is compelled to figure that out.
Mhm.
Did you know what the solution of your impossible thing would be when you started?
I had no idea what the solution would be when I started, and I never know when I'm starting. And I will say, at one point, I got halfway into this book and was like, "Oh no, I have to solve 7 disappearances now." And so, but that was kind of the fun of, I think, the first half of this draft was discovering who the characters were and discovering what these histories were, what the secrets could be. Because the only thing in common with all of these disappearances, like, they take place over 25 years. They're different people. They were doing different things. The only thing that's the same is the location and these people. And so it kind of like gives you this cast of suspects, is the only unifying factor here. And so it was a discovery process. And once I figured things out, I went back and kind of rewrote sections, but I saw the structure of this book almost like a trail itself, and that's kind of how I was approaching writing it. It begins with the most recent disappearance, where you're learning that information, and then the more that Abby discovers and kind of pulls on threads, it's getting her to the disappearance before and the disappearance before. And that was something that I think almost mirrored my writing process as well.
I love that. And that's what takes us into her head so
Mhm.
beautifully, because she kind of tries to ignore it, but clearly somebody knows something. It's almost this sort of locked room, locked place, locked in
Yes,
mystery where people aren't locked in, but there's a closed circle of people who
there
might
is.
know, and she can't stop herself from wanting to know. Tell us a little bit about Abby and a little bit about some of the other characters that we'll meet.
Yes, so Abby moved to this town when she was 18 years old. She had just lost her mother, and she found herself a little bit adrift, and then she was given this job at the Passage Inn, which has since become her home. And she is a little bit suspicious of people, but she's been there 10 years. And so she kind of thinks, okay, nothing's happened for 10 years, or I haven't, learned anything new. There's nothing really buried under the surface here, and kind of believes what they're saying. But then when the missing journalist brother shows up and they do find the first piece of evidence, it kind of changes her entire perspective of this place. And this was a place that was her home and safety, and she loved everything about it. And now all those elements she loved become really uncertain, and there's this element of danger to it. And can she trust what she thinks she knows about this place, and especially her relationships there? So I think her closest relationship is the owner of the inn, and her name is Celeste. And she's a little bit of a tough love person, but I love the dynamic of their relationship. Celeste, I think Abby says she can tell how much Celeste cares because of the things that she entrusts to her responsibility. So it's really the two of them who are working together at this inn. Celeste is very well respected and thought of in town. And so the fact that she's vouching for Abby also makes her more accepted as an insider. Some of the other characters that she's had a long history with, the tavern owner's son, whose name is Corey, who does these walking tours, is she has a long, complicated relationship with. They had, romantic past, but they don't right now. But there's a whole cast of characters who are about her age, who she feels like she can never quite fully crack into their group because they grew up here and know things that she doesn't.
It's fascinating because you create this whole setting where Abby does know secret parking places and she does know where secret keys
Yeah.
are hidden, and she's in on some of the secrets of the town, but she's smart enough to know that there are other secrets that she can't seem to discover.
Yeah.
But something has happened. It's interesting because also when you were talking about that she's only been there for 10 years only, and
Right.
this balance of insider and outsider. And the tourists, as you were saying earlier, come to this town. It's beautiful, I guess, if you look at it as beautiful, or terrifying if you look at it as terrifying. And there's this voyeuristic, sort of almost ugly desire to look at the picture of the fraternity four and think about how people are missing, and you're risking out with your fancy equipment. Talk a little bit about that, how the public and then how the public deals with it, and how Cutter's Pass embraces that.
Yeah. So, I'm really interested in like the things that draw. I feel like the mystery is what's really keeping these cases alive. It's the fact that there were no clues. There's no bodies. There's no resolution. Like anything is possible. So all of these legends are still like capable things. Nothing's been disproven. And so the public has started to come. And she can kind of recognize them. Like if they come in late after they're at like after a tour and they've been drinking at the tavern and they stumble in like they've escaped something. And so I think she has a hard time with it because she sees that these are unsolved mysteries that could very well be tragedies. But on the other hand, this interest is also keeping the cases alive and bringing attention to them. So there's kind of this line between that. And I think the town kind of embraces it for the same reason. Their primary draw, they are a tourist town, and their primary draw has always been their outdoor offerings. And suddenly this thing happened, which could have been a huge like deterrent to people coming. And so instead of that, they really leaned into it and they said, yes, this is the place they were last seen. And the tavern changed its name to the Last Stop. And this is the last place that these fraternity four was seen. The last picture ever taken of them is on their wall, and people kind of come in and raise a glass to them. So it's this really unique kind of line between like a mystery, but also like terrible, terrible things have happened here. And so I think every character has to come to their own way of dealing and grasping that.
And Abby sees the missing people as human beings.
Yes.
Something happened to them, real people with real lives. Something happened to them, and yet her livelihood and the town's livelihood
they depend on it.
Depends on this gruesome interest in it.
Yep. Yes. So I think in a way they felt like they almost needed to, because if they become known as, okay, we're the most dangerous place in North Carolina and people don't want to come anymore, their other option was to embrace that identity and say, yes, we're the most dangerous town in North Carolina.
It's interesting. Lynn is saying solving the mystery isn't in the town's interest either. I mean, if everybody knew what happened, which is such a wise comment, then the mystery would be gone. I want to read one more thing here, which is this is reminding me of. People are all trying to figure out what might have happened, and there's a legend that there's a man living in the woods, and he's the person that's taking these people, and that you have written. Warnings passed around with seasonal workers who saw the remnants of a burned out campfire along the river and shivered, who spotted a flash of color in their peripheral vision as they navigated downstream and looked again. It was a legend that continued to grow with nothing to disprove it. Other visitors had asked about it as well, something to tie each case together. a singular danger they could understand, that the threat was not the things we warned them about, exposure, animals, dehydration, and disorientation, but human. There's not really a census, I said, about whether there's someone in the woods. But isn't that exactly the problem? No one knows who might be out there, but people talk, right? People talk, not about anything that mattered, not about anything real. And there, you are balancing how the legends go and how much people care with how much Abby is thinking these are real people.
Right. And I think they're very happy to talk about these legends. But the second it becomes, well, what about a person here? I mean, that's not a line that they're going to talk about at all. I mean, they don't want to talk about the fact that it could be one of them. It's really, they're only happy to talk about these legends that are really, far-fetched.
But when you talk about the haunting of Hill House and when you talk
Exactly.
about, not that those aren't real,
Right.
but there are people can believe in that there might be something else, and that's why the townspeople turn to those very specific hiking things. Dehydration, you could fall down a ravine. It's muddy. It's dangerous. You could be cut. You could be hurt by an animal. You could be burned. Nobody could come. Nobody could find you. It's dark. Book list in its rave review called the setting itself malevolent. How did you work on making that be so real?
So my parents were avid hikers, so I grew up hiking. I stopped hiking like after I didn't have to do it when I was like after I was a teenager. I said, okay, well, I used to hike. I don't do that anymore. And then in this way that came full circle when I had kids of my own and they were a little bit older, I was like, it's a great idea. We should go hiking. And so we started hiking again. But when you're hiking with your family, you're not usually thinking about like a malevolent setting. You're kind of appreciating the beauty instead. So when I was writing this book, I decided I needed to take some research trips. And I stayed at various inns and bed and breakfasts at different points in the North Carolina mountains and the Virginia mountains that were all kind of close to the Appalachian Trail. And I went in different times of year. I went in the winter, I went in the summer, and all of that, I went in with like the mindset of this is a beautiful place. But now, what if I was somebody who was afraid? Like, how could this be terrifying instead? And, in the winter, it's so different because the trees are so bare and you can see forever. And on the one hand, you're saying, okay, well, nothing could be hiding in here. But then I was thinking, well, I can't hide from anything instead. There's nowhere to hide or run. And it's sort of the opposite in the summer where, there's a scene where they round a corner and you're like deep in the rhododendrons and like close up behind you and like you just disappear. And anything could be hidden out there. You take a step off the trail and you become disoriented. So I went into these trips with trying to see both angles to it. And I think that's something I tried to capture in the book as well. At one point, Abby is taking Trey out on the trail and he says, why did you stay here? And they get to an overlook and she's like, look at this. It's the most beautiful place in the world. And she looks over at him and he looks terrified because for him, his brother disappeared and all he sees are the potential for injuries and danger instead.
And that duality is so gorgeously through your entire book. I was picturing you. I mean, I was picturing you thinking of things to make it scary, which is such a writer thing. I have to tell you, I was hiking on the Appalachian Trail once.
Amazing.
And we stayed overnight in a motel on the, sort of an innish like place, like the Passage. And we were awakened in the middle of the night by some big commotion. Mm-hmm. And so we all went out into the parking lot, and the mountain behind the inn was on fire. On fire. And so somebody was standing next to me in the parking lot, and I said, what is that? And this person who was a local says, baby's out. And I said, baby's out? And he said, yep, baby goes to prison, gets out, sets fires.
Oh my God.
And I thought, I'm not going.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it was really scary. And that's as Margaret in the back room, and that's why you'll never find Hank on the Appalachian Trail again, ever again. Yes. And the good news and the bad news was the next morning it was pouring. It was torrentially, and we went anyway. So there you have your next book.
Okay.
There you
Yes. This is all really perfect information for next books. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. The insider and outsider conflict, though,
Mhm.
that we were talking about earlier, how there is this town full of people that might be trying to keep her out, and new people can come in and try to get in.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about that sort of the setting versus the people.
Yeah. I think, there's almost a trade-off to which Abby comes to terms with at some point. Like, this can be your home as long as you decide to keep these secrets too. And by doing that, it means you're not digging into the history. Like, you will be accepted into this place if that's kind of going to be your approach as well.
If
And
you
then
leave
this
it
is your
alone, if you leave it alone.
if you leave it alone. And I guess at some point you have to, she's kind of like, well, is that what I really even want? Do you want that? Or, she's the type of person who I feel like can't leave something alone. Like, she's going to follow it, even though, but I think by the time she gets to that point, she's been there so long that it becomes a question, do I even want to know? Like, this is my home, this is my family. But I think, I feel like the setting is a little bit reflected in the people as well, where that duality is there. They're very welcoming. It's a very welcoming community if you would take that trade-off. And, if you're just there to visit, you're really kept at arm's length, and you'll be told kind of the fun on the surface legends and stories, but you're not getting anywhere other than that.
I mean, Abby's desire to know is reflected a million times
Yeah.
by all of us who are reading The Last to Vanish, because honestly, it is the fastest paced, most exciting. You are the queen, as the New York Times said, of twists and turns, because it had me gasping. So it had me gasping so many times reading this book. I love the title, The Last to Vanish, because it has so many meanings.
Mm.
Talk a little bit about the triple meaning, at least, of that. And was that always the title?
So this was not my working title. I am not someone who usually like comes up with a title right away. I usually have like a working title. And in this case, my working title was what the visitors had called the trail, which was the Vanishing Trail, because people were on this trail toward the Appalachian and then they were never seen again. And so we started workshopping. Like, Vanish was always going to be in there, I think.
Mm.
And I was at the end of my first draft when we were coming up with like, what's the right title here? And I felt like structurally this was the perfect title, because the book is actually structured on the missing persons cases. Even though it moves forward, it starts, part one is Landon West, who's a journalist. Part two is Alice Kelly, who disappeared 10 years before.
You
And
all,
so, yes. So you're kind of getting, and the last to vanish. And then as you're reading, it's like, and then the last one to vanish. So it is kind of taking you from case to case. And the book kicks off because, Trey, who is Landon's brother, and Abby are searching for Landon West, who was the last to vanish. And he's what really kicks off the story, because, they can maybe explain away a few disappearances, but then it's a journalist who's there to investigate the disappearances. I think the sheriff even says, like, it's really bad optics.
Well, that's such a town thing to say. That's such a cutter's pass thing to say. And it's also, The Last to Vanish is such a trail title.
It is.
That you're really on the trail of something, just like your whole book is. And it may mean that The Last to Vanish hasn't happened yet.
Right. Like, is Abby going to be the last to vanish if she is digging into this thing that, like, she knows what's going to happen if she starts digging? It's not going to be seen well. And if the last person who was digging has disappeared, like, she knows she's putting herself in danger doing this.
And that is why we cannot wait to find out. Let me hold it up one more time, at least one more time. The Last to Vanish we're talking about, and we're almost ready to take questions from you. So get ready to ask questions. We'll take them in about 1 minute. But let me ask you, Megan, have you always wanted to be a writer, this kind of writer? I think the first book of yours I read was one of your young adult books.
Yeah. So I did always want to be a writer. I was a huge reader growing up, as a huge writer as well. But it was not the career path that I pursued first. It seemed like such a dream. to be able to do. And I also loved science, and I pursued that path first. I went to school for biology. I worked in biotech for a few years. I was a high school science teacher. And it was when I had my own kids that I really, I'd been saying for a long time, I want to write a book. These are the types of stories I want to tell. My mom was a huge mystery reader, so those were always the books I was devouring at home. And I love the puzzle aspect of it, and like the unknown of everything is what draws me. So I set out to write my first book, and it kind of, I guess, pulled together all my different career paths beforehand, because they were inspired by like a what if science unknown, and they were set in the world of high school, where I had been teaching. And so I have 7 young adult suspense, and this is my 6th adult suspense. But I feel like all of my adult books, like my past of writing YA, I feel like has influenced the things I'm interested in writing about in the adult world, because I feel like at the heart, it's very much about how the past impacts the present, and how it impacts the characters and who they become from there.
I love that your past impacts how you write as well. But
Yes.
I'm always interested in, there's a moment when every author thinks, I'm going to write a book. And there's this crazy sort of naive or confident
Yes.
something combination where you should say to yourself, how do I do that?
Right.
Why did you think you could do that?
I wasn't sure. And, I think it was, I'd written before where I would start with an idea and I'd get about 30 or 40 pages in, and I'd get to the part where I had to figure out what was actually happening. And then it would kind of go into a drawer, never to be seen again, because I'm not someone who does a lot of plotting up front. And so, beginnings are exciting, but then the middle is the hard work. And I think I'd also been, intimidated by the idea of rejection and, do I really know what I'm doing? I think it was just the right time in my life, that I thought, well, the worst someone can say is no. And a lot of people said no for my first book, but I just started writing every night when my kids were in bed. They were 1 and 3. I had like blackout curtains, and I would put them to bed at 6:45, which I could get away with. And they gave up naps, but I wrote like every night from 6:45 until I couldn't write anymore, and set myself the goal of just reaching the end of something, because that was the big hurdle for me. I'd never reached the end. Naively kind of sent it out, and got a lot of feedback in the rejections about, and I took that as sort of like, okay, it's a not yet. And these are the things I have to work on to get to the next level. But by that point, by the time I finished my first book, I was hooked. And I've been doing it ever since. And I feel like I learned so much during that process.
Of course, that's what you hope. We hope to learn more as we go along. But it's interesting to me. And my final question, and then we'll take questions from you all, because I see someone, Sherry, saying, "Luckily, book 13."
Yeah.
That's amazing. Is you started out with everybody saying no,
Mm-hmm.
and now everybody is saying yes, yes, yes. We love you, Megan Miranda. What does that feel like to be such a superstar, beloved author?
Oh, it's the most amazing. Like, I feel like when you write, it's almost like a conversation with the reader. Like, these are things I'm thinking about. These are stories that resonate with me, and to have them resonate with other readers is like the most incredible feeling and experience. So I am so grateful that I get to continue to write this type of book and write about these types of characters who I love. I mean, I spend like a year or more in their heads, and I get very attached to them, which is also probably why I write standalones, because like I see them as okay at the end of a book, and I don't want to put them through anything scary again after that. But it's just been such an incredible experience, and I'm so grateful for all the readers.
And you see so many of them here today who I know have questions for you. So if you can stick around for a couple of minutes, we'd love to ask you some questions. Our readers and viewers would love to ask you some questions. Who do we have? Blazer Margaret in the back room asking questions this afternoon. Question time. It is indeed question time. Let's see who we have spinning the wheels. I know someone had asked, oh, Leisha, hey, Leisha, do your characters talk to you? And if they do, have you had to change something in the story because of it? What a great question.
That is a great question. I wouldn't say they talk to me exactly, but I feel like I'm really in their head and you get to know who they are. And yes, by the time you reach certain points in the book where I might think to myself, this is what's going to happen at the 3/4 mark. The character's going to do this, and that's going to take the book in this direction. And then you get there after you've written or spent like a year in this character's head and you've learned their relationships and you know what their fears are and what their dreams are. You're like, that's not the decision that they would make. And your book does change, but I feel very strongly about staying true to that character and the character arc and their motivation. And that's usually the thing I see first before plot is the character arc. But for this book in particular, I first got the sense of Abby's voice. I was on a little trail walk in my neighborhood. It had just stopped raining. I walked into the trees and it still sounded like it was raining because everything was still falling, like the water was still falling from the trees. And I took out my phone and I started to write, like I heard her voice and started to write in my notes app, where she was explaining this and saying that this place was like the past was still with us. And we just kept circling things that had already happened. And that I think became part of the end of chapter 2, like the first paragraphs. So I do feel like you hear their voice and suddenly they start to come alive from that.
I'm just in awe of that. I get as much as I can imagine it. I can imagine that and the sound. Did you dictate it or type it?
I typed it.
Yeah. It's amazing. Do you still have that?
I do. It's still, I have and I keep the running notes app because that is, I'll have ideas when I'm out and I just write these lines. And sometimes I get home and I'm like, I have no idea what I was thinking about, but sometimes it really is just like a description or a thought. And it gives rise to something else in the story. A lot of it makes it into the book.
Those are the puzzle pieces of the story that your brain is collecting for you. And you're so wise to hang on to them. Who else has a question? How do you name your characters? Oh yeah, good one.
That's a good question. I will say at this point, I almost feel like it's a process of elimination because I have a very large family of my extended family. And so I don't want to use anyone's name of someone who's related to me because they're all suspects. So I try not to name anyone after a character after someone I know. And inevitably, the first person who reads my book in my family is like, so funny, my name's in there. And I'm like, oh no. But I'd say my first few books, it was really just names I loved. I mean, names I loved that I didn't use for my own children. I think about them a little like my children. So usually they're just names that I really like and then make sure that they're not in any of my previous books as main characters. I do read baby name boards and think about the years, especially when was a character born, what were a lot of common names at that time.
When my husband and I drive around, I look at street signs and I'll say, oh, Waltham and Washington, the corner of Waltham and Washington. Washington Walters, and you can really make great names out of street signs and intersections, and you just flip them around. Who else? Little things you don't know. What idea that you had was more appropriate to adult novels? Oh, Sharon, brilliant question. To make the switch from YA.
That's a really good question. So I'll say I write my books the same, as in I put myself in the main character's head and I write first person. And so the only thing that I approach differently is their perspective and think about, is this a situation that's more suited for a main character who is figuring something out for the first time, putting these events into a context that is very unfamiliar, or somebody who is filtering this through 10 or 20 or 30 or more years of hindsight and lived experience that has kind of changed the way that they view something. Not that you're not figuring yourself out in adulthood too, but just that idea of hindsight, I feel is really specific to my adult books as opposed to my YA. And my first adult book was All the Missing Girls. I did not set out saying I'm going to write an adult book. I started writing it. And the first thing I wrote was what happened when they were 18. And that's what I started with. And because it is really about what happened when they were 18, the main character's best friend has disappeared. And I very early on realized that what was missing was this element of hindsight. These characters were actually 28, being drawn back into the past, just as the book was going to be moving in reverse. And they needed to go back into the past for answers. And suddenly I was like, oh, I'm writing an adult book. So it felt like a very natural progression in that way. And so it's really about the story idea.
And such a life-changing book for you that was.
It really was. It really changed the trajectory of my career. I'd say one of the highlights of my career, like this was a book I was working on for a really long time, without anyone knowing about it, and it wasn't under contract, and it was a lot of trial and error. And I remember the moment I finished the draft by myself, and like that moment of, oh, I reached the end of this draft and this story that wouldn't let me go. And, it's a very close book to me because of that. And it was an incredible experience that it then, resonated with readers as well.
Did you have a moment of thinking secretly to yourself, this is kind of good?
I thought, part of me was like, is anyone going to be interested in this? Is this weird that it moves backwards? But it was something that I just like, it was, people talk about like the book that won't let them go. And this was it for me. And I felt like that feeling was there for a reason. Like there's something here that could, be big.
That's marvelous. Well, we are so grateful that you did that, and so grateful for all the books, as is Reese Witherspoon. Can I quickly ask you about that? What was
Yes, that was incredible. Yes.
More. Tell us more.
Okay, so so The Last House Guest, I had no idea. My editor called me on a weekend. I saw my phone, like her name. I was sitting on the couch. I'd just gotten back from my first leg of tour, and I was like, why is my editor calling me on a weekend? And she told me that it was going to be the Reese's Book Club selection. And I was like, what? Like, I made her repeat it several times. I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't tell anyone for, a month. And so like, I just, didn't say a word, and I was getting ready, I knew it was going to be announced, and I was getting ready to like take a screenshot and send it to everyone in my family. And as I was doing that, I got like a deluge of texts from like all my friends and family were like, Megan, did you see this? Because they all follow. And I was like, yes. So it was the most incredible experience. So many wonderful like book clubs are a part of it. And it just like opened up people who maybe aren't drawn to mysteries and thrillers as their first choice, who were still, giving it a chance and seeing if there was an element in there that they liked. So it was such an incredible experience.
Yay, for all of us. That is wonderful to hear. I love how your face changed. You just blossomed into this memory of this fantastic, wonderful thing.
Complete highlight. Yes.
Wonderful. It's more to come, though. More to come. One more question. Who can think of one? We have many on the side here, so I hope, Megan, when we're finished, I know this is pub day and you're crazy, but do stop by.
Okay, yeah.
Comments. There's love and adulation and admiration and all kinds of things. Do you have a favorite underdog book, a book that you can't believe is not well known or lauded, or something that you've read that's new that we should not miss?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, I'm looking over at my bookshelf right now, and there's a book. I'll show you what I'm reading right now, which I'm loving, which is I'll Be You by Janelle Brown, which is, it's about like twins who were child actors, and now they're in adulthood, and one disappears, they've drifted apart, and it's all the elements I love in a book. So I'm loving this book right now. One book that I feel like there's books that resonate and really stick with you. It's called The Wildling Sisters by Eve Chase. And I found it super atmospheric, and it was also like about family in addition to memory. And there are lines that still, when I think about that, they give me like goosebumps. So that's one that I recommend all the time. But I'm a huge mystery and suspense reader. Like I feel like I could give you like lists and lists of favorites. Is a favorite. I can't wait to read Jennifer Hillier's new one, which was just out, and Julie Clark's new one is also like top of my list to get to next too.
So many wonderful books. We could have a program, just the two of us, talking about books that we hold up, and then we'll put your list in the comments when Margaret gets 2 seconds. We have so many more questions, and people are loving this, but our time is up. Our time is way more than up, actually. And Megan, you have to go get even more adulation on your pub day for The Last to Vanish. So let's quickly spin the wheel of fun, you all, and see who's going to win a copy of The Last to Vanish. And I'll spin the wheel, and Do you love
This
this?
is cool.
I think we should sing during it somehow.
Yeah.
I see Casey Gnomes is here. Oh, yay. Hey, Sherry. This is when I get to see Sharon is here. Yay. Sharon Carlson Person, a wonderful reader and who's someone who tells everyone when she loves a book, and we rely on that, and a
Yay.
crime time favorite. So, Sharon, you will get my email and you can send me your address and I will get it to Megan and she will send you your signed book.
Yes.
Megan, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hank. This was such a great way to kick off Pub Day. Thank you so much. And
Well, I
thank you
hope you have
everyone for coming.
many more accolades to come and much more joy to come. Before you go, let me just first of all not only thank Megan for coming and urge you, if you are not Sharon Carlson Person, go out and get this book, The Last to Vanish. You and then call me or email me and let me know how you like it, or put up a good review for Megan. That there's nothing better you can do for an author than putting up a good review. Quickly before we go, next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, we are going to. This is a huge advanced reader copy, a special bound manuscript, an early edition by E.G. Scott, The Rule of Three. And E.G. Scott is really two people. And I cannot wait to read this book, and we will talk about it like crazy next week. So we will see you then. You all promise to be here. Megan, safe travels. Have fun. And until next time, you all, remember this: it is always safe inside a book. And we will see you next time.